Sheffield Metals always recommends using a qualified contractor to install your standing seam metal roof. However, we do recognize that there are homeowners that are interested in taking on a DIY metal roofing project. So we put together this DIY series to talk about some of the common pitfalls, challenges, and considerations you should think about before going down a DIY journey. What's up guys, welcome to the Metal Roofing Channel. I'm Thad Barnette. In today's video, we're gonna talk about DIY standing seam metal roofing installation, and we're gonna talk about some of the challenges, the hurdles, what that process looks like from the perspective of a real homeowner who installed his own standing seam metal roof. So I'm gonna kick it over to our guest, Tim. Thank you for being here, Tim. We really appreciate you joining us on the channel.
You're welcome. Look forward to having the discussion.
Yeah, so you installed your own standing seam metal roof, and we're gonna kind of talk about the whole process you went through. But first, can you tell me, why standing seam and why is that roofing choice the one you wanted to go with?
I think there were three primary reasons. The first being the expected longevity of the roof itself. I'm retired. I just retired recently. I'm looking for a roof that will outlast me. So that was one of them. We're also in Florida, and wind mitigation is another big must-have for me. And I think the standing seam is a great option for that. And also, I actually really like the way standing seam roofs look. So those are the three reasons that I chose that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the kind of thing we hear all the time, especially in an area like Florida. So tell me about the installation. Let's start there. Were you always considering installing this roof yourself, or was there, contractors involved? What was kind of that early process like?
Yeah, this is where I'll give just a little bit of background. I definitely did not start off thinking this was going to be a DIY project. We had actually had a roof installed 3 years prior to us taking on what we did with the new standing seam roof. We were renovating the back of our house and found that our roof was leaking. And we have actually two pitches on our roof. One is a 3/12 pitch, and that's about 65% of our roof. And then a flat roof, which is only a 1/4 inch and 12 inches, was about 35%. And that flat roof was leaking.
This is where I pulled apart the transition. I'm going to start taking the lower panels off. And you can see that these Z-closures aren't sealed very well. They're not sealed all the way across the top like they should be. There's only 3 screws, one in either end, and then one in the middle. Some of them aren't even tight all the way. Now you might be able to get away with this on a 3-inch pitch roof, but on a 1/4 inch pitch roof, this is unacceptable. And this is probably the top source of how the water's getting back up under here and then under the metal panels. This peel and stick is soaking wet on the top when you pull a panel and feel on it, and it takes forever to dry out, might never dry out.
Basically, water was getting underneath the panels and sitting on top of the underlayment, and so these were galvalume panels at the time. They were just basically sitting in water because the water really couldn't drain out.
So when you pull a panel and you put your hand on top of this peel and stick, it's soaking wet. And this is a 3-year-old roof, and you can see all the corrosion in here. It's pretty bad. And this is always wet because every time it rains, it leaks, gets underneath the metal panels. This is soaking wet, and it just sits there. Some of these screws aren't even galvanized. Some of them are just steel. Some of them are galvanized, some of them are just plain steel screws.
And so it took us a while to figure out what was going on, and I'm gonna spare you the details there, but we finally figured out that the pitch transition was probably leaking, and possibly even the snap lock seals were leaking. And we learned through all that process, that really the snap lock panels aren't the right ones for the flat roof. So I tried working with the original installer to see, if we could get some headway on getting it fixed, and that didn't get us very far. I basically lost confidence that they could actually fix the issues. I then contacted other contractors, and there weren't really any that wanted to put a metal roof on my flat roof, which I understand, but again, I wanted something that I was one and done with and also looked nice and matched the rest of my roof. So then I began researching, and that's when it really became a DIY, because I basically wanted it the way I wanted it. And it was a lot to take on, but we're really happy we did it.
Yeah, tell me about that research. How did you educate yourself? Do you have a roofing background? What was that like?
No, I don't. When I don't know, how to do something, and I, want to see if I think I can, YouTube is going to be my friend. There's a lot out there. So I started watching YouTube, and I started sifting through the different video content out there, looking for what I would call best practices on standing seam roof installations. And I came across a couple metal roofing companies that have, a very broad range of videos available. Sheffield Metals was one of them. And so I really started studying those videos. And in doing so, I actually learned about the roof I had and where some of the issues were, just by, what weren't best practices on the roof I had that was leaking. And so I spent probably a couple months, just learning about the install before I was totally convinced I could do it. So it was really YouTube, but your metal roofing channel was one that I watched so many videos on, and it was so helpful. So that's really the way I learned how to do it.
Gotcha. So now we know some of the background of why you needed that new roof, what type of roof you wanted, how you educated yourself. Let's talk about the actual nuts and bolts of the installation for a little bit. Talk to me about the tools. Is there anything that you knew you needed right away? Is there anything that you kind of gathered as you went and learned about the process?
I already have quite a bit of tools. I mean, screwdriver, it really came down to what kind of tools are specific to this install. And I have some tin snips, but they weren't really the best, once I started looking into this. So I got a set of 3 aviation snips that were forged, left hand, right hand, and the center cut. And, thankfully I have used tin snips quite a bit in my past, so I was pretty confident that I was going to be okay, but I wanted to make sure I had the best tools. Another one that was, I think, super important to me was the screw gun. That's basically specific for metal roofing install. You want something that you're going to be able to set a specific torque that's repeatable and consistent. And an impact driver really isn't your friend when you're driving in pancake screws into your roof deck, and you can strip them out, you can strip the heads. So that was one of the videos that actually I saw on Sheffield Metals. And those are basically the 2 things that I purchased just for the roof.
Okay. So, before you actually started the install, what was kind of the most intimidating part? What were you looking forward to the least when it came to that install?
Yeah, so when I first started, and it might have evolved a little bit, I have a pitch change transition that I felt was either the sole place that we had the leaks that I spoke of, or it was certainly the primary place. And that transition, based on, again, your videos of Sheffield Metals and some other companies that basically were all showing the same best practices. Mine was not at all what I would call a best practice install.
So this is the north end of the flat roof transition, pitch break transition. And this is a gable and then a sidewall. The sidewall was leaking. Very early on, I did some work on it to fix it. That's not really a proper sidewall flashing, so that's part of the problem. And this doesn't look like the correct end of a pitch break transition here. We're running into a gable and a sidewall. That's what I got.
I was a little bit intimidated by that because I knew I had to get it right. And, that I would say was definitely what I saw as the most challenging part of my install. And that pitch change transition also has somewhat of a complex intersection with a gable and a sidewall. So I actually built a full-size mock-up of that area of my roof and just practiced with the old panels before I became comfortable enough to get up on the roof, because I don't think you want to be learning stuff on your roof. You want to be pretty confident you know what you're doing by the time you get up there and start putting panels and all the rest of this stuff in place.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the sheer preparation that you went through to actually get this performed was huge.
It was everything, really. I mean, I was very confident once I got up on the roof that I was going to be able to do it, and we'll get there. But yeah, I think it worked out really well, and it's all about the planning process of it. And, you might find that you're not very confident, and maybe then that's not the right way to go.
Yeah. It works both ways, right? Preparation can help you decide to continue forward or pull back. So let's talk about installation day one. You've got your accessories, you've got your panels. What was that process like of the actual installation?
Yeah, so obviously, you're going to start by removing your current roof covering, whatever it is. So you got to get that off. And, you need to consider removing your old underlayment if you can get it off. I was able to get mine off. That was probably the most labor intensive part of the install, was peeling that underlayment off. It had been on there about 3 years, and it was really, really adhered to the roof deck very well, actually. And you don't have to take it off, but I felt better about just putting a new layer on the roof deck. And we also replaced a lot of our roof deck. So in those instances, obviously, the underlayment was coming off. So I really felt better about taking the entire underlayment off.
Okay, we're getting ready to lay our first full course of the Shark Skin Ultra underlayment. We've replaced all the plywood on the perimeter of the low pitch roof. The older, or the original deck that's remained, we found when we removed the deck, the nailing was very inconsistent and very sparse. I'm not sure how it passed inspection, but I guess it did. The roof was permitted and redone 3 years ago, and they totally botched this part of the build, or the project. But we're just about ready to lay. This is a 16-foot width here of this low pitch roof. We're ready to do about 12 foot of the underlayment. And again, it'll be doubled up, staggered, so that it's basically double coverage.
If you're doing the whole roof, you go to the other side and you do the same process over there. So it's a long process, but you can get there.
Yeah, so how long did the process take, kind of from start to finish?
I think I researched, I'm going to say, a couple months. It was a process for me because I had a roof that was leaking, and it started off as me trying to understand why it was leaking, right? So I was looking at the videos and comparing what I considered best practices from, people that actually do this all the time. How did that compare to the roof I had? So I spent a lot of time understanding that, and then seeing where probably where I had issues with my roof. So I'm going to say it was a good solid 2 months of research and being competent. And then it was about another 2 months to actually get the roof on once we started.
Yeah. Was it just yourself, or did you have help?
I did a lot of the work myself. My wife helped as much as she was available. She's we're retired. She does a lot at our church and other things, but she was probably up there with me about 50% of the time.
Okay.
And it's a good thing, because there are some tasks that are almost impossible to do by yourself and get them right. You need a second set of hands to help you put stuff in place and to get the underlayment on correctly and straight and overlapped right and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically two people's the right number. You can do some of it by yourself. So that's kind of the way we did it.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit, you mentioned that pitch transition was one of the most intimidating parts. Once you actually did the install, do you think that was the hardest part to deal with?
The hardest part from a labor perspective was just peeling the underlayment off.
Yeah.
But the hardest part for, I guess the install was where that pitch change transition intersected with a sidewall and a gable. And there's not a lot of content online, for that. You guys have the different details like the pitch change. That's kind of a video, and it shows how to do that. The sidewall, you can watch a video on that. The gable, you can watch a video, all that ridge cap. But there wasn't one that showed how to handle an intersection of three of those. That's where I would say that was the hardest part to get right. And I spent a lot of time practicing on that mock-up again before I got on the roof. So I was very confident by the time I got up there that it was it was all going to flow downhill the right way. You got to start at the bottom again. Everything overlaps from the bottom to the top, and just making sure that process was followed. And I felt really good about the way it came out.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a little bit of info on that is, from a manufacturer's perspective or someone that's sharing installation details, things like that, there's standard processes, best practices, right, for typical details. When it comes to tie-ins and things like that, that's really where that craftsmanship comes into play, because every roof is different, every condition is different. And so spending that time with your mock-up, really figuring out your specific condition, I think made all the difference.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I couldn't have done it without doing that. I would have botched it, and I would have been redoing it up there, and that just didn't make any sense.
Yeah. What about other learning moments or aha moments throughout the process that maybe you weren't expecting to learn?
Yeah, I would say one of the challenges that actually was more of an aha moment was staying dried in. And what I mean by that is once you get on your roof and you start pulling off panels or shingles, whatever it is, and you've lost that barrier to the inside of your house, and assuming that, you care about the inside of your house getting wet and your drywall and all that, you've got to do something to keep the water from entering. If you're not fast enough to pull everything off, and even if you don't have rain in a few days, you need a big crew to get all your your underlayment back on. And we weren't able to do that. So we did smaller sections, and doing smaller sections, we weren't really ready to put underlayment on because you don't put a small section on. So we tried our best to work in the way that you could get as much underlayment on as quick as possible. But we ended up having to use 6 mil plastic and duct tape to dry a lot of the roof in as we went. And that became a monotonous kind of laborious thing that you just had to do. And some days you're putting it on and you spend all that time doing it and you get rain that night and it's great. But the next morning you go up there and you're peeling it all off again, to keep going. So that was one thing that was a challenge for sure. And we just had to do it.
Yep. So how long ago was it that you finished the install?
I finished the install like the first week of July.
Okay. So, we're a few months down the road here. We're almost at the end of October. How has the roof performed so far?
Our rainy season begins in June and runs through, say, mid-September. And so we were trying to make sure that we were finished, and we finished just before the rainy season started. And one thing that was nice about it is we got a lot of heavy rain in those months, and it was really nice to see the roof performing well. And we still have, we're renovating that part of the house that the flat roof is on in particular, where it was leaking. And we still have no insulation or no, drywall for the ceiling. So we got a really good read on how the roof was performing compared to where we had a lot of leaks before. And I'll have to say, I was very confident we were good to go. And getting that confirmation with those heavy rainstorms was just awesome, actually.
Yep. Is there anything that you would do differently now that you're kind of looking back at it?
You know, there again, I don't think there's a lot I would do differently for the roof that we installed. I did about half the overall, you know, our entire roof. It was only about half. The front part of the house is from the original contractor, and that is all on a 312. So that part didn't have sort of the challenges that we had on the back part of the house with the pitch change and all that. So we're not seeing any issues there. The only thing I would say there is I wish I'd have chosen aluminum over galvalume on that part. We did use aluminum on the new part of the roof, and it meets at the top, you know, ridge vent, and it's matched in pretty well. So we're feeling pretty good about it.
Nice. So what advice would you have for another homeowner who's looking to DIY their standing seam project, you know, after you went through all this?
Plan to spend significant time researching, right down to the appropriate panel types for your installation. That was one of the first things I found doing the research at the beginning, which wasn't really to do a DIY, but how does my roof compare to the way it should be? And we really shouldn't have had snap block panels on our flat roof. You really want a 180-degree mechanically seamed roof with that low of a pitch. So that was an issue right off the bat. So you got to definitely put the right material in the right places. And then practicing with mock-ups. I don't think you want to do things for the first time on your roof. I think you want to be downstairs messing with either scrap panels or older panels that you can work through and gain confidence. And then even driving screws. When I first got that screw gun, I've used a lot of screw guns, but it was a little different than the rest of them. So me and my wife both practiced with it, and you know, we drove into plywood, and you know, we kind of found the sweet spot so that we weren't stripping out the screws or things like that. And the other thing is, you know, you don't want to be doing this when the temperatures are either too hot or too cold. And if it's going to take a few months or 2 months, you want to pick a time where you work within that window that's got the best weather. You can't do it if it's, you know, in freezing, icy conditions. And here in Florida, I would never recommend doing it in the summer. People do that for a living, but, you know, if you're a DIYer, you're not used to being out in the sun. I try to stay out of the sun as much as possible. And then you got to work at a comfortable pace. You don't want to rush. So you can minimize any redos, which thankfully we didn't have any. So we spent so much time preparing for what we were doing.
Yeah, man, Tim, you're a trooper. You're talking like a roofer now. I'm glad you got the roof you wanted, and it all worked out.
It really did. And again, I can't thank you guys enough. You know, those videos were just monumental for, again, gaining the confidence that I could do it. And, you know, I have some background in working with sheet metal and all that kind of stuff, and that helped. But I just know that you want to get it right, because I did not want to go back through what we had been through ever again. Yeah. It was terrible.
Well, thanks again for joining us today, Tim, you know, on the Metal Roofing Channel. I really appreciate it.
Glad I could help.
Yep. Well, there you go. If you have any comments or questions, please leave a note down below this video. Subscribe here to the Metal Roofing Channel. As always, I'm Thad Barnette. We'll catch you next time.